Welcome back to Tokyo on Fire. Frequently, we focus on the opposition parties and the disarray that they suffer. Recently, there was a merger of two parties, the DPJ and the Isshin no To. We talk about that with some bemusement because the stakes are really high, the election is coming down the path, and we just wish that people would get their acts together so that there would be a really fair democratic process. Michael Cucek, you join me again today. You're watching this very closely. The opposition parties now, you're watching this, and they're doing some things that they have never done in history in preparation for this upper house election.
It's really strange that when we began this year, we were talking only about how completely out of it the opposition parties were. We had nothing nice to say about them, and perhaps we shouldn't have said anything at that point. But what we had to say was, this is not going to work. This is a terrible idea. For example, the DPJ's incredible poster, yes, you may hate us, please vote for us so that we can act as an opposition party. That was their campaign poster. You just thought, these people just simply don't have it, and the LDP is going to run rampant over them. And that, in fact, invites Prime Minister Abe, forces him almost, to call a double election.
Sure.
But now the tables have turned. The LDP has slip-ups, and it's been very much helped by a revived weekly magazine culture in Japan that has suddenly, after many decades almost of dormant behavior or sort of floor mat behavior, has suddenly become the thing you have to read each week to find out what the news is going to be. Because all the scandals are coming out in the weekly magazines, not on television, not in the
newspapers. You would have thought that the newspapers are the promoter of free speech and telling people what the real story is, and they've fallen in the wayside. They are very careful about what they say these days.
They're being very, very, very careful. So is television. And now the weeklies, who, when we first came here, there was a must-read because it was only in the weeklies that anything lively happened, they're back.
Right.
And they have been going after the powers that be.
Very big time.
Very big time. And anybody that even attempts to join the power structure gets absolutely savaged. This week, Otodake, the handicapped activist who has been recruited to run on the proportional list for the LDP, there is a scandalous story about him printed in, of course, Shukan Bunshin.
Right.
Now, that is hitting the ruling party and the ruling coalition. At the same time, the DPJ, the main opposition party, has finally finalized its merger with the Innovation Party, this rump party which used to be part of the Osaka big tent party that seemed to be the new opposition in Japan, but has since splintered and is now basically just a regional element. The leftovers in Tokyo and elsewhere in the country are flowing quickly into the DPJ. The price for that is the loss of the name of the party.
Right.
So where it used to be called the Minshu To, the Democratic Party, and they put on of Japan in the English language version, it's now called Minshinto, which sounds very much like Taiwan's Democratic Progressive Party. But in order to avoid confusion in the English language, they're going to call it Democratic Party. This DP, I guess we'll be calling it, it's come together. And there are other independents that are now flowing into the party, which you wouldn't expect. You would think that they would all try to get into the LDP because the LDP is the winner.
Right.
But the LDP doesn't look like a winner right now, seemingly. For these independents who have been floating about ever since the big tent DPJ exploded with all of its elements going in all directions during that brief time they were in power, it's coming back together, and we're looking at not just a good, solid opposition central party, but then satellites also. And one of the satellites, for the first time ever, is the Communist Party.
Right. The Communist Party is also taking on a new energy and deciding to do things that they have never done in the past.
Well, the signal was the seating at the opening of the Diet, which is done by the emperor.
We reported that. We talked about that. And
the communists showed up for the first time ever to sit and listen to the emperor. Now, ostensibly, they're not for the emperor as existent and his constitutional role at all. But in order to demonstrate that they were willing to sacrifice and get this alliance, well, it's coalition, who knows what it is, going, they were willing to make that step. And they've gone beyond it. And they're going to be making all kinds of concessions based on their historical precedent, which is always being the spoiler. They're not going to be the spoiler. They're not going to have candidates in every district.
This is new. This is very new.
This is something that goes against what everyone thought was their fundamental principles of operation, that they would always have a candidate in every election, in every district. Not so. That is changing the dynamic significantly, particularly in these upcoming elections, where we're seeing, which are the by-elections for the Hokkaido and the Kyoto seats.
Right. The Hokkaido 5 is coming up in about 3 weeks, an election that many people will hold as a barometer for what the upper house election will hold.
Well, we see the Kyoto election is pretty much, the LDP's probably given up on that one because the disgrace of Miyazaki Kensuke and his extramarital affairs during his wife's pregnancy just blows out that seat. It's a strong communist stronghold, and the communists...
Give it up for loss, let's focus elsewhere.
Yes, that's right. The communists are going to vote for whoever the opposition candidate is. They've made that agreement. It looks like a completely fried position for the LDP. The Hokkaido one, they're making deals in order to make sure that that doesn't go. Like,
unbelievable. They're bringing back Muneo Suzuki to come back and help them win this election.
Unbelievable. The guy who epitomizes corruption and the LDP's nadir, the absolute base level, is suddenly absolutely necessary because he controls what?
20,000?
20,000 votes in Hokkaido and in that district, and he can deliver.
Right.
And so his daughter, who was a member of the DPJ, has left that party and is now an independent. And what was she doing the other day? She was lofting softballs to the prime minister for him to hit out of the park. What a seduction!
Listen, I don't know if viewers think that this is as interesting as it really is, but in light of the Communist Party coming up with a new algorithm for getting more votes, they're going to give up some seats and they're going to focus on other seats. The LDP, through Ms. Suzuki, came up with a criticism of the Communist Party as a violent group, and it was reported in the newspaper just, I think, today or yesterday.
We should have we should focus on the Communist Party in a special segment just for that.
I think so. It's huge.
And the thing that we also have to understand is that the DPJ is really in charge. While we talk about the communists, this merger that's happening, Okada is staying on as the new party leader, whatever the name of the party is, Minshinto, whatever you want to call it in English. The Secretary General is going to be Edano Yukio, the guy who's the Secretary General of the DPJ. The Policy Research Council head is also going to be a DPJ member. Yamao Shiori is her name. It's going to be a DPJ tent, which is all they're doing, and it's expensive. They're changing the stationery.
Yes.
Now, historically, that's not a good idea. Parties that have changed names just prior to elections have done poorly in a historical record sense. But they had to do it. That was the price that the Japan Innovation Party demanded in order for the merger to happen, and Okada had to make the merger happen, and now it's happened, and they'll work it out later. Almost certainly, after the election, they'll revert to the old name.
Yes, as we said earlier, politics makes strange bedfellows, and you can see that in them closing the ranks at the DPJ or the current Democratic Party. There are a lot of people that are opposed to it within the party, but they're biding their time, and they're swallowing what needs to be swallowed so that they can move forward. And it looks like this is building up for a real street fight for the upper house election. I also think that this is kind of a poison pill. If the prime minister thinks he's going to have a double election, you better watch out, because we, the opposition, not just the Democratic Party, but the communists too, we're working in conjunction with them too.
They had a meeting just yesterday, And it wasn't about House of Councilors. It was for coordination in a case of a House of Representatives election. They're already picking joint candidates for that. If the Prime Minister thinks he can do the same trick twice, bring Krugman here, have Krugman tell him, don't do the tax rise.
Wrong direction.
Don't do the tax rise. And he doesn't. He says, I'll delay it once again. And because I delayed it, I have to have a national referendum that I know that the people approve of what I have done. If he thinks he's going to do it again, the same way he did it in 2014, the opposition is telling him, bring it on.
Right.
And that is something is really different.
Well, wasn't it the Chief Cabinet Secretary that just said a couple of days ago, we're not going to bypass the implementation of the consumption tax. We're going to move forward unless there's like a Lehman shock or perhaps another tsunami or something really huge. We're moving forward.
Yeah, the signals coming out of the LDP right now are very mixed, and one has to think that the narrative has shifted. Has shifted in the favor of the opposition. Whether this is just a fashion that the press has finally decided, okay, we've played the game long enough. It's time for us to move on to back to being advocates, back to being on the side of people who want to overthrow the LDP. We're tired of being the lapdogs. We want to be the watchdogs of the political process. Whether that's what's happening, I would certainly think that would make politics more interesting. I can't say I hope that's what's happening, but I can certainly say that Abe's in a place where he doesn't necessarily want to be.
Let's talk just for a second for the benefit of some viewers who are wondering, this animation that we have, this excitement that we have about this situation. Why is it so important? Why do we focus on this? What are the implications for this moving forward? Why even be focused on it?
Well, in this case, from my interest is always good governance. And it's really hard to have good governance when there's one major party that's going to definitely win.
Right.
At that point, you have fewer people who are willing to challenge the system, fewer people willing to run for public office, because what's the point? The LDP candidate's going to win, who cares? It doesn't matter. There are fewer people getting involved in the process. The voting rate goes down because people say, what's the point? I can't vote for anybody I want to vote for, and even if I did, my vote would be overwhelmed by the LDP's machine. And what happens, of course? Arrogance, self-dealing, trying to give everybody something rather than focusing on strategic issues. We need to, go this way and drop that. That decision-making process can only happen if, there's a way of losing. But if there's no way for the ruling party to lose, governance goes down the drain. That's my excitement. When things perk up, that means the governing principles will get better.
Well, also it has an economic impact for people who are doing business here, because if in fact there will be a double election, you can probably guess that the consumption tax will be withheld for another year or so.
Oh, the direct implications in terms of fiscal spending, in terms of tax relief, they're all there.
Right.
And I mean, we had just floated yesterday a brand new idea to stimulate the economy, which is the counterpart to giving the 30,000 yen a month gift to poor elderly. Now,
why stop there?
Why stop there? We're going to give them to the poor young too. But we're going to give them in a way that they can't bank it. They're not going to give them cash. We're going to give them instead vouchers, shohinken, these coupons, which they can only use for purchasing items. They cannot convert it into cash legally. Of course, we all know the moment they start getting handed out, we're going to see on the internet all kinds of exchanges, cash for coupons.
Right. Well, we were also talking about negative interest rate, and it was interesting to see the governor of the Bank of Japan in a press conference with the prime minister kind of disengaged, like the minister during questioning too, disengaged from the conversation because he's the Bank of Japan, the prime minister is doing his thing, I'm doing my own thing. A lot of subliminal signals that are being sent out about where the economy is going, who's going to be getting a higher salary, with the shunto activities of the labor force?
Well, the thing is, okay, we're going to make predictions. I predict that very soon the Abe administration is going to have to pivot against corporate interests. The shunto labor offensive, the spring labor offensive, ended
Almost
up
no progress.
1,500 yen a month base up in most industries. 1,500 yen. That's less than 50 yen a day, which cannot, if you get, which means after a week you can buy yourself a cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. That was the base salary offer, and that's what the unions have to settle for on a month, 1,500 yen a month. That's not going to spark inflation. Right. That's not going to give people a desire to go shopping. It's just not going to do anything for the economy. So they've had 3 years to really start reducing their cash mountain and pushing it out into the people. And that's what Mr. Abe has been crying for, demanding.
One of the three arrows, raise the level of income.
It's going to go forward. It hasn't. I'm sure we're going to see that pivot. It is going to be a populist turn. I'm almost certain about that.
But isn't the timing kind of off kilter? I mean, now is the time for the negotiations of higher salaries. Once that's done,
it's done now,
right?
It's done. They've already agreed. The unions have agreed to this meager salary increase. Of course, it's across the board. Of course, it's every person inside the union gets the 1,500, but it's still only 1,500. Mm-hmm. It's an insult. It's less than 15 US dollars per month increased pay. It's nothing.
Okay, corporations are still sitting on mountains of cash.
They're still sitting on mountains of cash, and there's nothing down the pipeline. They've had, in fact, not income tax rising, they've had income tax cuts, and the government is committed to income tax cuts. So that cash mountain will only get larger because they're paying less in taxes. This is going to be combustible, and I'm sure we're going to see some really, really populist statements from the Prime Minister just after the beginning of the new fiscal year.
Right, the fiscal year ends in maybe 6 days.
Yeah.
We move into April 1st. It's a whole new game.
It's a whole new game. They've put away their ledgers for the year. We've already finished the labor negotiations. We're going to see what the profits are at the companies. And if the companies, well, it's too late now. They've already proven their stinginess.
Yes.
It's going to be open season.
Okay, the next big thing on the schedule is Hokkaido election. We're going to forget about the Kyoto election because that's a gimme.
That's probably a gimme. The opposition would really have to mess up.
And then after that, the next big blip is the G7.
The G7, which is ostensibly the reason why Mr. Abe is putting together this special council, but everyone knows it's got an ulterior motive. But the G7, Japan is going to host it. Goodness knows if the anti-terrorist preparations that they've been making will be sufficient. We hope so. It's kind of hard to get to Ise-shima. It's hard to get into the country. We have, luckily, a moat around the country,
right.
And it's not necessarily a place that troublemakers get into very easily.
Except for me and you.
Oh, well, you and me. That was before they really had to lock down the boundaries. But they're going to have to put on a good show there. But even so, you have a feeling, just have this feeling that the momentum has shifted, that it's not going to be a coronation for Mr. Abe, that in fact he's going to come out of it in a sort of ambiguous, there will be some kind of ambiguous statement at the end, or maybe no statement of unified purpose, and then he has to face election.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's putting a lot of marbles on G7. I think he's going to come out smelling very good. And I think that there will be a buildup of something else in the context of the G7 where he can go into the election, at least for the upper house, and come out smelling like a rose.
Okay. My general understanding is, given the polls the way they are for the parties, the LDP is set to take back some seats from the DPJ. My view is it's not going to be enough for the House of Councillors to be in the 2/3 majority.
Sure.
That he needs in order to amend the Constitution. Fine, okay. But he'll still have a majority. He'll have a majority in the House of Reps. They'll be in control.
The coalition will still
will still be there.
Right.
Whatever. That is my view. Even though, as we're saying, the opposition's waking up.
Very interesting stuff. Please continue to stay tuned. There's a lot going on here. You can anticipate a lot more coming up.